Well, I'm excited to welcome my friend Matt Grossman, who is the director of the Institute for Public Policy and Social Research and professor of political science at Big Ten hockey champion Michigan State University and a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center. I've been following your writing, Matt, and political analyses for many years. A great follow on Twitter if you want something that's actually smart and fact based. And last August, he came out with his sixth book, Polarized by Degrees: How the Diploma Divide and Culture War Transformed American Politics. It came out in August of 2024. We were well amidst it all, but I don't think the subsequent November disproved anything you wrote about, which is good. I really enjoyed the book, and I'm really happy to have you with us today. Thanks for joining.
Thanks. Great to be with you.
So you got to start at the beginning, of course. What's the diploma divide? When did it become a thing, and why does it matter?
Well, the diploma divide is usually just refers to the fact that college-educated voters are more likely to vote for Democrats and non-college voters are more likely to vote for Republicans. It actually extends beyond that, where anybody who's spent more time in school, like in graduate school, is even more likely to be a Democrat, and anyone who went to a more elite institution is more likely to be a Democrat. But it's basically just this idea that there's a big education divide among the political parties. It's happening all over the world between the left and the right across rich countries, but it's taken a particularly virulent form in the US because we only have two parties. And so something that might appear as an anti-immigration populist party on the right elsewhere has to take over or become a big part of the Republican Party in the US. And anything that might appear as like a green party or an urban intellectual party elsewhere might have to take over or be a big part of the Democratic Party. The trends are both long-standing and new. So the Democrats have been losing white non-college voters since the 1970s as a part of their coalition. It used to be the predominant voting base of the party. Even in the 1990s, it was half of Bill Clinton's votes. Now it's down to a quarter of the votes for Biden and Harris. But the trend of white college-educated voters moving towards the Democrats is much more concentrated in the Trump era. And then the trend of an education divide extending to Hispanic and Asian American voters is even really in the last couple of elections.
Well, I don't recall this being so much discussed when I was graduating college. Do you think, we talk about income divides for sure. Back then the Republicans were the party of the country club, and now more the party of the country. And they talked about racial divides, but this wasn't a fault line. It felt like folks focused so much on. Is that because fewer people went to college back then, or because colleges were a lot less political and ideological?
Well, you're right. The income divide used to be bigger than the education divide. And as the education divide has increased, the income divide has declined. And again, that's occurring all over the rich world. So we don't think it's anything specific about colleges in the United States. It seems to be most related to the rise of culture relative to economics in dividing the two sides. Wherever culture is discussed more, you see a bigger education divide and a smaller income divide. That's true within the United States. It's true cross-nationally, and it's true across time. So what seems to have happened is just these kinds of cultural issue attitudes were always associated with college education. In other words, college-educated people were always more liberal on issues like abortion, the environment, gay rights, race and gender. But those issues have all become a much bigger part of our politics, and with that, the education divide has grown.
So let's drill down on that a little bit because that's really interesting. My certainly before reading the book and even after reading the book, I feel like so much of this in my head is downstream of institutional mistrust that's born of that's as a result of inequality. The people with more education, the people with more skills are winning in the global economy, are finding more economic opportunities, and for that matter are feel less condescended to, maybe are doing the condescending toward the deplorables who are clinging to gun and religion. But in my head it was more than anything else downstream of economics, and the technology The techno people who win technology win the economy. People who win globalization win the economy. But in the book and here, it sounds like you're perceiving and maybe finding in actual research, which is better than my gut, that it's more these culture issues.
Well, I think those can be reconciled. Certainly, it's true that education and income are increasingly associated, and that education brings people into a really different social and economic world. And those kinds of things reinforce the education divide. And you're right that certainly distrust of experts has become larger and more concentrated on the right over time, although it seems to be a little bit later than the education divide. So, at least as much a consequence as a cause of the education divide. But even where economists and political scientists find big economic effects on things like voting for Trump in 2016, they actually tend to find that even if the initial instigator is economic, like the China trade shock, that the intermediary variables there are actually changing people's opinion on social and cultural issues or views of institutions in general rather than economic policy attitudes. So I think you're right to posit the sort of anti-institutional idea behind it, but it turns out that facing an economic shock actually ends up changing people's cultural attitudes as well as their economic and political attitudes.
That's so why? Like why it's if I lose my job because a extreme investment risk taking Wall Street sets me up for for being on the wrong side of derivatives and the downstream trades. What why does that turn me anti-LGBTQ? How are they related?
Well, the one economic attitude that it is associated with is trade, and so you might see that kind of coalesces around views of internationalism versus nationalism. So there are some relationships, but I'm not positing that it is mainly an economic instigator, but to the extent that there are economic circumstances, they tend to flow that cause the education divide. They tend to flow through these cultural attitudes. So it's not that none of your other issue attitudes change when you face difficult economic circumstances, but they're not the ones that are driving this divide. In large part, it's because economic views generally are just kind of anti-incumbent views. So whoever is in charge faces a backlash whenever the economic circumstances are not looking good.
Throw the bums out. Although what's interesting, and you and I know follow the same stuff. If there has been anti-incumbent fervor, 11 of the last 13 elections have seen the party controlling the House, the Senate, and or the White House tossed. And yet, by many traditional measures, GDP, unemployment rate, certainly God knows stock market, it's not a bad economy, but it feels like it is a bad economy for a lot of people. And those are the kind of the populist armies who feel the precarity. And for other people, it's not, if not the best of times, it's economically, you have a addressable market of 6 or 7 billion people. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, certainly economic circumstances matter. And although they still do track overall objective economic circumstances, there certainly can be a divide where people feel less good than the economic circumstances imply. It's also, as you know, increasingly political. We see these immediate shifts of Republicans feeling better about the economy now that Trump is in charge and Democrats feeling worse about the economy. So you have those dynamics as well. But this anti-institutional fervor and really kind of resentment of elites does, easily kind of coincide with some of these economic views. It's just not that the economic views seem to be driving them. One reason is just because college education itself does not seem to change your economic views. So people from when they enter college to when they leave don't have more liberal economic views, whereas they do have more liberal cultural views. That continues when you live in an area surrounded by college-educated people, or you're in an occupation or a business that has more college-educated people. All of those things make your cultural attitudes move leftward, but don't change your economic attitudes.
Yeah, I always find that so interesting when people leave New York or California and go to Texas, they kind of embrace their inner red a lot more, and a lot of folks maybe who grew up in more conservative territory who move to inner cities and work, among the latte drinking set, of which, by the way, I am one, but become a lot more culturally liberal or moderate. Here's I don't know if you
Yeah,
date.
and that it does extend. That's a big part of the education divide because it's not only the individual level; it's also who you're surrounded by. So that means that the geographic changes are even bigger than the individual level changes. So college-educated areas are moving to the left even faster than college-educated people, and vice versa.
So that's interesting. Do you find that schools recruit for more progressive students, or the people who say, I want to go to college are inherently more like that, or do they drive learners leftward?
Some of both. So, certainly, if you leave your home rural community for a college town in another place, those people who are self-selecting to do that do have more liberal cultural attitudes and more cosmopolitan attitudes. So, there is some selection, but there is also causal evidence that you do move in a culturally liberal direction during college. To the extent that we know, it does not seem to be consistent with sort of professor indoctrination. It seems to be more about social networks. So if people are surrounded by other people who have more liberal cultural attitudes and more diverse friendship networks, those people move left further. The kind of content of the classes seems to be less of the driver. But we're also forgetting the sort of third part, which is that once you graduate college, you enter a very different social atmosphere. You live in a different place. You're in a different profession. You're surrounded by different people, and all of that continues its effects in making you more culturally liberal.
Yeah, that one that rings very true to me. So, have you guys studied the following question? Was it the entry into the Republican Party of non-college voters that drove college voters out? Or was it the entry of college educated voters into the Democratic Party that drove non-college educated voters out of the Democratic Party? Did you get a sense of, a chicken and an egg in this thing?
I think the evidence is more consistent with the latter. First of all, the Republican voting coalition hasn't really changed very much over time. If you divide it into non-college whites, college whites, and minorities, those lines are pretty flat over decades. Whereas in the Democratic Party, you have a huge shift in the voting coalition with non-college whites being replaced by white college-educated voters and racial minorities. Another way of putting that is, the U.S. is getting much more diverse and more educated over time, but all of that change has been concentrated within the Democratic Party, and the Republican Party has sort of stayed the same in the face of change. We do have some evidence that the sort of image of the Democratic Party mattered. So, for example, the number one thing people said they liked about the Democratic Party in every election from 1945 to 2008, I think, or 2004, was that it was the party of the working class. And the number one thing that they said they disliked about Republicans, again for 50 years, was that it was the party of big business or the rich. And so, if you have that strong of a kind of a class divide that's built into the parties, and people come to see, well, the Democratic Party really isn't representing the working class because that's not who votes for Democrats. It really has more of a potential, I think, to change the coalition of the party. That's not to say college-educated voters haven't been driven out of the Republican Party in the Trump era. They have, but I think it's more consistent with the Democratic story.
When you guys did the analyses, you kind of controlled for income because it's in theory, one could, the people who earn more are more likely to have gone to college. So, what might be perceived as a diploma divide could be an income divide, but you compared and contrasted, and it's more of a diploma divide than an income divide.
Yeah, in fact, we would have an even bigger education divide if income were continuing to have its role in dividing people on the basis of party, because it's still the case that if you control for education, that income is still slightly moving you into more likely to be in a Republican column. And again, that's true throughout the rich world. So I think it's important to take the clues that this is not just kind of an American phenomenon. So everywhere, the income divide between the left and the right divide is declining, where the education divide is increasing. And it's those people kind of in the diagonals that are moving the most. So you have your highly educated people without high incomes, we'll call them graduate students, who are extremely liberal and moving liberal faster than other people. And then you have the people who have high incomes despite low education, who are moving rightward the fastest.
Bohannon, DM me, please, and I'll read your question as opposed to getting into open mic night, which is hard to drive with. Um, I want to turn to the question of media and social media and the impact, because I think they have a big impact. There've always been cultural divides. The internet era makes everything so much more participatory. And so everybody's now a publisher, everybody's an activist, and things feel so much more intense, even though in real life, it's like Twitter's not real life, but it feels like it if you're so online all the time. And I'm a history nerd, as I know you can appreciate. Arguably television helped catalyze another era of campus unrest and reaction against the kind of the older patriarchy who were seen as too slow on civil rights and too quick to go to war. How much of what you found is new media driven?
Certainly, there is a relationship. People who are more engaged in online media and new media and social media are going to be more caught up in these political divides and more interested in these culture war questions. And as they come daily now. Anything can be a culture war issue, and almost nothing is perceived as completely apolitical anymore. So a lot of that I do think is part of the story. Another big point that we would make is just that it's not that the culture war has been kind of a stable polarization. The left has been advancing in culture over a long period, and that has been made possible by new media and by the sort of role of media actors in our system. So the right is not reacting to nothing. They're reacting to an increasing liberalization of the culture. And a lot of that is not really via policy issues. It's via things like television and movies that people see and react to.
So, do you read the Substacker, former blogger Noah Smith?
Yes.
I love it. He's a really smart guy. We actually had him on one of these along with Hal Brands, which was fun to talk about sort of the new Cold War with China. He has been writing for a while that he thought the culture wars were launched by the concurrent birth of social media and great financial collapse, which I think you make that point too, and that we went through this pretty intense decade, but they were burning out. And his theory, which he was more hopeful about in 24 than 25, is that culture wars are now contracting, not expanding. Although that was before the reelection of President Trump. Uh, Thermostatic politics, though, as you've written about, and I probably stole from you or Matt Iglesias or somebody, suggest the activism arises in response to whoever is in power. So we think maybe they'll be coming back. As somebody who spends a lot of time studying culture wars and their impact in politics, do you get the sense they're extracting, they're contracting, they're expanding, or we don't know yet?
I certainly think the culture war is ongoing and is unlikely to subside, especially in a second Trump administration. That doesn't mean that there aren't ebbs and flows in, especially that direction of cultural liberalism. So it's certainly true that we still have thermostatic politics when it comes to cultural issues, even if the trend is toward liberalization. So just for example, gay marriage gained in public opinion over a very long period, but it still lost ground in the public when it was enacted, and vice versa. When there were restrictions on it, it made a comeback in public opinion. So you have an overall liberalizing trend that's still responding to the politics of the moment. And you have a very strong thermostatic politics on things like immigration that we just lived through, where Immigration opinion was growing quite a bit more liberal under the first Trump administration, and then took a huge shift in the rightward direction in response to the Biden administration. So I would expect those thermostatic patterns to continue, but I wouldn't think that signals the end of the culture war. I think the issue is that it has to be culture versus something. So there would have to be a new economic dimension or a rise of the traditional economic dimension to kind of counteract where we are on culture.
A
The,
a
yeah.
great thing that just popped up in the chat from Lynn was asking about COVID and the degree to which I don't know if that was a cultural event, although it was more medical. That was an economic event, although if you held stock and you didn't panic, worked out pretty good. Um, what did you find the impact of culture? Was it an accelerant? Did it change? Did it change the direction? Feels like it was an accelerant from what I read. But how did you guys see that impacting what, as you point out, has been a growing divide since the 70s?
The big place it was in an accelerant is in the divide over expertise. There, started to be a very strong resistance to experts on the right, and a surprising degree of agreement and sort of stand behind the experts on the left during COVID. As you know, experts do have greater knowledge, but they also have distinct values, and they have different interests, and their pronouncements are a combination of their greater knowledge and their distinct values and interests. And people really noticed that they were being told to do things that the evidence didn't always follow from, and they reacted pretty strongly to that. So if you look at things like views of scientists or views of public health authorities, or even the very quick polarization over Anthony Fauci, you see these cultural concerns that started as in kind of an education divide becoming a huge divide between the parties. And it's not just public opinion. Now there is, as we're seeing, a huge divide in terms of who is appointed to government agencies, in terms of who Congress listens to. That is in some ways kind of an outgrowth of what happened, or at least what was accelerated dramatically by the COVID era.
Yeah, I don't know. You being a professor and thoughtful in this, have you already read Martin Gurri's Revolt of the Public,
Mhm.
which is such an extraordinary? It was a book written in 2014 that basically, when you read it, you're like, this guy fully on called Trump. He called Brexit. He saw all this coming, and his whole theory of why there is growing mistrust of elites in part is because elites are supposed to know everything, but the internet gives so much information to so many people that what we learn is that elites aren't all knowing. They're just doing their best, but you can go back and you can find, I mean, way back, the medical community said smoking is good because it kind of calms you down. And like, okay, that's kind of a miss. And, they missed on peanut allergies. Marty McCary, who's about to get confirmed at FDA, wrote a really good book last year, where women were told don't use hormone replacement therapy. Well, turns out that was bad medical advice. And you kind of similarly, young men who are otherwise healthy were probably going to be fine if they got COVID, but there was an increased risk of myocarditis. Now, maybe you still needed the whole herd immunity. Let me turn back on the political stuff. I'm interested in where you see the parties going from here. I mean, you've drawn in some ways a line, although I tend to feel like there is a whole class of people like me who are, don't like culture wars to start with, am college educated, I'm not going where AOC would want me to go, and I'm not, wearing a red hat and going and protesting a lot of stuff. I'm feeling a bit homeless. But do you think Democrats are going to be able to reclaim a lot of the working class while holding on to the college educated and more progressive folks who I don't see going to to a JD Vance candidacy in 28? And likewise, do you think the Republicans can build on Trump's legit gains among the multiracial working class that he demonstrated in 24, without further alienating educated professionals? Give me your sense of 28, 32, who the parties continue to evolve into.
Well, there's a lot of self-reinforcing trends here, and nothing in 2024 would make that less likely. In fact, there were two big changes in 2024 that should accelerate the party coalitional changes. One was an expansion of the education divide more to Hispanic and Asian American voters. And the other was a growing geographic divide and an ability for us to kind of differentiate whether it was about urban density or college education. And what we find is that when those things divide, it wasn't actually the density, it was the college education level of an area that is moving things in a Democratic direction. So this was an election where those things went in different directions. Trump gained in urban areas, but still lost in college educated areas, and extended the education divide to racial minorities. So both of those things are signs that we're going to continue on this path. I would separate that a little bit from the just sort of overall direction of the parties. As you said, we're pretty close to parity between the parties, and whoever won the last election in a presidential election is obviously immediately favored to lose the midterm by a 5-point margin. So, that's enough to shift the median point in the electorate. But I think you're likely to continue to see the coalitional changes that we've seen for the last few decades.
So I knew my buddy Mark Bohannon would have a smart question. He did. He wants you to, you know, he wonders when you look at the polls, it's not as simple as college, non-college. It's also 4-year college, 2-year college, high school. Did you guys, how did you approach that level of nuance and sort of like quantum politics? When you get to smaller levels, does it change what you find?
Basically, anytime that you do have more fine-grained data, you find an even starker education divide. So, as I said, people who have graduate degrees are more likely to be liberal than people with college degrees, are more likely to be liberal than people with some college, are more likely to be liberal than people who never went to college. Same thing is true on sort of a degree of elitism on the colleges. So, the most selective colleges that you go to, the more likely you are to be moving towards the Democrats and moving towards culturally liberal attitudes. The less elite institutions that you attend, the less likely you're seeing that. Among voters, we do commonly use this just divide between college and non-college because it's so stark. But among elites, I think it's important because 95% of members of Congress have college degrees, 70% have graduate degrees. So we're really talking here about something that divides the political class from the populace as a whole. And you don't really see you don't see a huge education divide on the basic college, non-college among political officials, but you do once you start dividing it into these other pieces. So Democratic members of Congress are more likely to have graduate degrees. They're more likely to have gone to elite institutions. And so, and same thing with cabinet officials and other kinds of indicators. So, I think the more yes, it's a spectrum from sort of most elite educated to least, and that shows up especially at the among political elites.
Yeah, when I feel like I was emailing you, I feel like we first interacted when I my post 2016 election analysis had a chart which I called the PH divide, where you looked at the national average of graduate degrees, and every single state that was above the national average was blue, and all but 2 of the states below the national average were red. And I'm a chart guy, and when it's that stark, it was really it was fun to be able to make a point so clearly and so visually, and that the college degree wasn't as neat as that, whereas PhD or graduate degree it was super clear.
And if you think about what that implies for the people who staff universities, they are extremely culturally liberal relative to the rest of the population. And so that's why, you see these continuing divides over institutions. And, we're unlikely to end that with the Trump administration seeing it very clearly that these are people who are associated with the cultural other side.
So you've thought about this stuff a really long time. Part of why you're fun to follow is you unearth and share and give perspective on so much data. When you were researching this, your 6th book, What'd you find that surprised you? So I assume you knew there's a diploma divide. You went looking for it to understand it and to explain it. But what did you stumble across where you're like, whoa, did not see that coming?
I think we knew that cultural attitudes had been moving leftward overall, but we were sort of surprised by the extent and the similarity across lots of different cultural issues where the public has moved left, and yet that didn't change the sort of number of people who still thought that the country was changing too fast, undermining traditional values, that the country was sort of getting diverse and too open too fast. So you have people changing their opinions on issues like gay marriage, but still finding that now we've gone too far. Now we're talking about transgender people in sports, and so there's a new divide, new issue to kind of extend that cultural divide. So what we were surprised by, but was just the amount of leftward leaning trends that you see over an extended period across almost all cultural issues, and yet that not really changing the people who think they're on each side in the cultural battle.
So you're a professor. I assume you're also in the classroom teaching a lot of this stuff. And yes,
Yeah.
so what's that like? Maybe MSU is a safer place to do it. I mean, I know I ended up, I'd always wanted to do something at the Kennedy School, and I got invited to do their Center for Public Leadership. Of course, it was totally virtual, which actually made it a lot easier to do for me. But one of the guys, like one of the big dogs there, was Arthur Brooks. And at the time, he was getting like protested. This is a guy whose scholarship is on happiness. And he was getting protested because of his background as a Republican. Now, happily, weirdly, that guy got protested maybe because he's famous, and the Republican lobbyist people were super nice and polite to in terms of the students. But these are really charged topics on university campuses. Are you finding first? How are you finding the students who come to do it? Are they girding for battle? Are they coming with interest? And how do you create, I hate the phrase, but how do you create a safe space so that you're welcome to come here as a conservative, you're welcome to come here as a progressive? And one of our goals is to make sure everybody can actually not only hear, but listen to the other side and not get all offended because what you heard is not something, because you felt like it was violence to you that somebody said something you don't agree with. How have you found teaching in this tough climate?
Well, my institute also runs a candidate training program that's half Democrats and half Republicans every cycle. And we do the orientation for newly elected Michigan legislators and new legislative staff. So we're very used to not just seeing students who have casual interest in politics, but actually people who want to get involved in the political process. And you can see polarization every year in the people that come in to those programs and as students. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're all on the cultural left. As I think someone noted in the comments, there was trends among young people moving rightward in this election. Now, those trends were actually disproportionately among people who are not in college, but there's still an age effect. Young people haven't established their partisanship, and they're more likely to be changing with the politics of the times. So you do see cultural conservatism on campus as well. But the other thing that you see is the big shift away from economic and towards cultural politics in terms of what is driving their political interest, in terms of how they decided which side that they are on. It is almost always culture, even those that decided to be on the right rather than the left. So that's a long-term change as well, where cultural politics are very strong among young people.
Go for folks who are wondering about 7 more minutes. I noticed in the chat a question from my friend Linda Evans, who is a world-class tax person, and I'm going to reward her because she actually didn't ask a tax question. We gotta encourage that because she asks so many tax questions.
Stop.
I'll read it out here. Does the diploma divide apply across racial and ethnic minorities as well? Explain your research on that, please.
The differences in opinion on cultural issues do occur across racial and minority voters. So everything that white voters are divided on culture, minority voters are also divided on based on whether they have a college education or not. But that has not materialized to anywhere near the extent in voting patterns, where racial minority voters still vote at higher levels for Democrats than you would expect based on their political opinions, especially black voters. So if you look at swing black voters, these are people who are conservative in self-identification, are conservative on economic issues, and conservative on cultural issues, but still lean toward Democrats. So there is a strong party attachment among especially black voters, but to a lesser degree, some racial minority voters that limits the cultural divides produced by education from having this big effect on voting. But we don't know how long that will last. You know, Democrats cannot rely forever on generating high levels of support among people who disagree with them on most cultural issues.
It is a fascinating thing to watch. So, six down, book number seven. What do you? Where's your? I mean, this book's back in August. You got time to start thinking about the next one. What is the next question you plan to research, or where do you feel like you want to go next on all of the great scholarship you do?
Well, I'm taking an even harder problem, the ones you deal with every day. The new book project is called Policymaking for Realists, and it is about how we are stuck with a two-party system that is not going to give us a verdict one way or the other for the foreseeable future. And that means our interest groups are polarized. It means our debates over evidence and implementation are polarized. It means that we should expect to experience extreme gyrations from administration to administration. And so, what does that mean in terms of policymaking going forward? And a lot of the evidence is just that when things do get enacted and get sustained, it still is often the old rules. It's large bipartisan coalitions that are behind the scenes more than in front of the television, and that are slowly building over time and incorporating developments at the state level as well as the national level. So it's a big question, big project, but it's meant to inspire some confidence that policymaking is still possible, but that any kind of big political restoration or reform is unlikely.
Yeah, Matt Iglesias writes about. I think he calls it the secret Congress. You know that and you, I'm sure, in the work you do with the newly elected legislators, find almost everybody that I feel like I run into, 90% ran for the right reason, are frustrated that the sum is less than the parts, really do want to find a way to get things done, and are open to compromise, but would prefer you not share that fact with the media. And I assume in the book you will also look back. I mean, there have been historical periods after World War II was one where it was there were change election after change election, and the margins were super tight. You reserve the right to get smarter as you research and write the book, but what have you found historically breaks us out of those patterns where there are no landslides, there are no consistent, I don't want to use the Rovian phrase durable majorities, but durable majorities.
Yeah, people do rightly point out that most of the time in American history we have had a more durable majority, but I don't think that necessarily implies that one is forthcoming. One reason is because we've had the ideological sorting now, and there are two big sides, and where you see majorities elsewhere in the world, they tend to come from divisions between the left and the right in multi-party systems, and not from some big victory for the left or the right overall. And so I don't think we should assume that that's forthcoming in an ideologically polarized era. But that doesn't mean that things don't still happen on a bipartisan basis. As you know, even during the first Trump administration, most things passed with the majority support from both political parties, and the majority party often gets its way on a couple of things, but does not get its way on many other things. I don't think that we should expect those patterns to change, even with the big gyrations that we're seeing.
No, you're right, and something I had put out a couple of years back, shockingly, a chart was observing how the 117th Congress, so the first 2 years of the Biden administration, were among the most bipartisan, productive Congresses of our lifetimes. Now, some of that is COVID carryover, but infrastructure, marriage equality, CHIPS Act. I mean, there were just a lot of really big things that got done. All right, Matt, last question. Who do you read and follow and find? I'm always interested in people I think are really smart and kind of going upstream, the people that they think are really smart. Offer a book or two, a Substacker or two, or people that you think who are out there are worthy of this wonderful audience's following.
Well, this won't convince anyone who's not already convinced, but I did just finish the Ezra Klein, Derek Thompson book, and I'm very excited to sort of see where this goes in the Democratic Party because there is a realization that a lot of the efforts to create regulation to hamstring authority have ended up just making it much harder to build things. And we are seeing some ongoing examples of that. And I would pair that with Mark Dunkelman's new book. I don't know if you've had him on, called Why Nothing Works, which is sort of about the history of how we got here, which is that it wasn't just the Republican Party that was sowing distrust in the federal government. There was the left very much involved in trying to hamstring government agencies, and it's led to our current situation. So
Yeah, that's on my wish list. I
all
saw
right.
that one, and Derek has already agreed he's going to appear here. Here, April 14th at 4 p.m. So pencil it into your calendars, everybody. I don't usually send the invite out till about a week out, just in case my or his plans change. This will be Derek's third appearance, so he's sort of like Paul Simon on SNL. He comes a lot. The book that Matt wrote along with David Hopkins is Polarized by Degrees. As always, we bought 100 copies. We're going to send a link out for people, as we always do. Enter your mailing address because we don't mail things. We buy things, and we are lucky enough to have authors join us. But it's worth your time. It's a really smart read. You're a great interview, Matt. Obviously, it's good to get somebody after the book tour, not before the book tour. That was really well done. I can't root the Spartans much more luck because Alan is still on the Zoom here. But good luck to you. Thanks for making the time.
Absolutely. Thank you.